Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. The Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you. We're streaming on am950radio.com. But I want you to meet my morning stars, Ashley down there in Memphis, Tennessee. Shalom to you, Robert, my beloved. And so many of you, please like and share, like and share, like and share. We are streaming on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. So, everybody, I need you to get those thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. That's the only page where I can accept friendships. Yeah, that's, you know, I got a limit from Facebook on my landing page. So go to Santita Jackson and Friends. And of course, on X, I'm at Santita J, at Santita J. So let's get right to it. We've been talking about this awful occurrence at Gettysburg College. So check out the first hour of the show where a young black kid who is an underclassman at that school had the N word carved in his chest by a trusted classmate, a trusted teammate from Gettysburg College. Got to talk about that. It was given to the police, and the police said no, because it's a felony. The police said, no, let the college handle it. Inappropriate. We're going to continue to follow up on this story, but we've been talking about Gaza now. Can you believe it? We're 2 weeks shy of a year since October 7th, since the horrific events of that day. And I think back on it and I remember CNN had their A team on the ground already. I said, what was that about? It's almost as if they knew something awful was going to happen. I didn't know. I'm not a conspiracist, everybody. I just know that, as a friend of mine said, coming out of the civil rights movement, and one of my mentors in it is this man who is with us today, uh, in politics and in the world. There are two things: acts of God and conspiracies. You just have to understand. There's a lot going on always, but I have so much admiration for this man because he's someone, I must say, he and his dear friend and partner, Jeff Cohen, have been working with my father for about half a century. And so I've known of his work for a very long time. And there's some people who've kind of guided me in this civil and human rights space. And Norman Solomon is one of those persons. Fairness and accuracy in reporting. He's the executive director of the Institute for Public Accuracy. I thank him for that. But Roots Action. If I mean, someone who was calling for us to look at Joe Biden 2.5 years ago, people said it was blasphemous. He said, no, if we don't do this, we're walking into a constitutional crisis. We're walking into a lot of issues. We've got to do this. And you know what? Look at what happened. We still don't know what happened with Joe Biden. I love Kamala Harris, but the process is something that was convoluted. He foresaw all of this. He said this is a danger to the democracy. It's a danger to the survival of the republic. And so comes this book, War Made Invisible. You know, we write these checks on these wars and we never see the effects. He said, no, don't be fooled. These wars are not invisible. People die. And we make war invisible because we've sanitized it. And he wants to show us how America hides the human toll of our military machine. Get that book, War Made Invisible, because that is what we do. And as we start this, I thought about you, Norman Solomon, because I read about this, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, which was established by our Congress in 1993. And they opened a museum in Washington that traced 100 million deaths to communism. Well, that's an awful figure. But a new book by David Michael Smith, Endless Holocaust, Mass Deaths in the History of the United States Empire, estimated that this empire is responsible for 300 million deaths. And we've got to look at Gaza. And my mother, bless her heart, said, you know what? Gaza's big. And we'll never get around that. Until we get that right, everything else is going to be wrong. Everything. And so for her, I'm not speaking out of school. She said, my vote is predicated on that. It's predicated on that. You can't justify genocide. And everyone, you can't paint with a broad brush and say all Jewish people sign up for this. That is not true. Among the leaders who are leading us against this genocide are Jewish people. And then some Christians are signing up for it. I mean, it's just a whole lot. It just really depends upon your worldview. But we need to look at how we make war invisible. How, in particular, we're making Gaza invisible because now we don't have a count on who's being killed. The Lancet study says 186,000 people have been killed, and that was 2 months ago. There's a lot going on here. And so I want to start with you, Norman Solomon, by thanking you for all of your work down through the years. We owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude for really standing standing with so much courage. And I thank you. I thank you for all that you've done and all that you're doing, because we need you now more than ever. Help me to understand how we make war invisible, and because I don't know if we don't think about the toll that we just write it. We lightly write a 20 billion, excuse me, $1 billion check in the middle of the Democratic convention. No one talks about it, and we just say, "Oh well." War Made Invisible. Tell me about the title and the premise of the book.
It's counterintuitive, really, because we get a lot of media coverage that seems to tell us about war. And I think the last 50 weeks is a good example. Gaza on the home pages, the front pages, all sorts of what we are encouraged to believe is really telling us what is really going on. I think that's part of the problem. The conceit, if you will, the illusion that we're getting the reality of war through the statements of political leaders in the United States and especially the news media, that compounds the problem that we're almost clueless if we're in the United States looking at the prompts, the media, the catchwords, the code phrases, the flashing images. We have almost no understanding, if we rely on news media, what war is about. And it sort of parallels what you were saying. And Santita, you've been at this for decades and decades, and it's you, me, millions of people in our own ways that we have the capacity to not simply buckle, not simply kowtow to those in power, that keeps the flame going, because as discouraging as the situation is, it would be much worse if people were not calling out, speaking truth, not only to power, but really about power. And so I think that's in our own way here at this moment, what we're attempting to do, because what's happened in Gaza since early October is not only the superficial, delusionary, often accounts and narratives that we get through news media, with the limitations of journalism, even at its best, technology. There used to be the cliche, television brings war into your living room. That's absurd. Can you think of anything less like a war than this stable piece of furniture? You get up, you go to the refrigerator, whatever, whenever you want, compounded by the bias. And that has so many different layers. And I tried to address that in terms of, and where the title comes from, War Made Invisible, because the bias makes war even more invisible. It's upside down. It creates this delusionary experience that we have, that somehow we know what's going on and we know who did what to who, when, and when history began. We're encouraged to believe that history began on October 7th, a meaningful, important history. Pardon me, people were living in Palestine for decades and even centuries before. There's the history is when it's defined, when it's confined, then we're confined because we don't understand. And this will probably sound familiar to you, the saying, when they can define you, they can confine you. I think I heard that from Jesse Jackson
Yes.
decades ago, and the light bulb went on for me. When we get defined and when events get defined, then our consciousness gets defined. So to sort of get to the second layer, the biases are so extreme. Here's an example that I cite in the book. During the first 6 weeks of the carnage in Gaza, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times used the word slaughter 60 times to describe what had happened to Israelis killed by Hamas on October 7th. Those same media outlets used the word carnage only once to describe what the Israeli military was doing to Palestinian people. How about the word massacre? The three newspapers, really powerful, influential papers, used the word massacre 125 times to describe what was done to the Israelis on October 7th, and used the word twice what was done to Palestinian people. This is an example of how our view of these events gets skewed.
Well, what are the moral consequences of that? I mean, how are Americans impacted? I mean, you and I have spent time overseas, significant chunks of time, and the reporting is so very different overseas than what we see here in the United States. How are we impacted by that?
I believe the consequences at many levels are very corrosive. We have different words for how to describe what is damaged, even if we don't recognize what and how the damage takes place. Moral, spiritual, ethical. These are concepts we're brought up with to believe, to feel, to say are really important. And yet, when we are in practice, not in theory, it's sort of like you go to the church, the synagogue, the mosque 1 day a week, but what about the rest of the week? It's all about not the theory, it's the 24/7, 365 that really matters. And what we get instructed by is the media, the politics, the culture tells us, hey, some people's lives really matter, and some people's lives really don't matter. And when that corrosion happens in our spirit, we are left with awareness of the world that is uh, very separating of other human beings. And when that happens, we lose touch with ourselves in many ways.
What about, but how are we supposed to feel about this? I mean, what Hamas did was horrific. And I think we have to establish that what the IDF has been doing has been horrific and disproportionate. It's like this is like you all have gone beyond this. Now we're reading that you want to turn this into beachfront property, and we know this is one of those resource rich places on earth. And so it's like, wait a minute. Now, I thought we started off. You need to deal with Hamas. They are a terrorist organization that you helped to fund because you didn't want to deal with Yasser Arafat and the PLO. I mean, it's just it's just gotten so convoluted, Norman Solomon. I mean, what are we supposed to believe? How do we get out of this? It's just I feel like, when you see like Charlotte's Web, you know, I just feel like I don't even know how
Yeah.
how we can cut through all of this. It's so there's so many layers to this.
Yeah. You're reminding me of a saying among some musicians, you might feel like you're getting lost, but you won't if you know the blues. And politically and ethically, I think we might feel like we're getting lost, except if we have a single standard of human rights.
Mm.
If we have the same grid, the same way of evaluating and measuring, we don't ask the race, the gender, the ethnicity, the religion, the sexual orientation. We don't ask any of that nonsense when it comes to what is right.
So where should we go with this? Because it seems that there are more and more revelations every day about this particular conflict. And I'm looking at this conflict because it is of such tremendous consequence. People, we're in the midst of this election season, and we're seeing Kamala Harris, who I think is the infinitely superior choice in this election.
Mhm.
But Gaza is an issue for her, and you have the uncommitteds who who are publicly coming out and they're saying, "I'm not going to support her," because she's not come out forcefully
Yeah.
uh, in support of the Palestinians against uh, what Israel is doing to these people. I mean, what do we? I mean, and we are not even 6 weeks away from this election. It's an election of tremendous consequence, but it seems like we're stuck here.
Yeah. Yeah. Like so many people, I've been thinking about how we don't get the choices that we want in
Mm,
November. We would imagine or wish for and work for a lot of different alternatives, and yet we're stuck with these two. And you used the word convoluted a couple of times, and I think it well describes the process that brought us to the nomination of Kamala Harris, because so many Democrats in high places would not face reality that Biden wasn't up to the job of running against Trump. And so we lost so much lead time, so many months that could have been vigorous debates. We could have had a lot of choices of candidates. Instead, we have to deal with what we have. And my feeling is, and I could talk personally for what it's worth, I live in California. I don't talk to anybody about how I think people should vote in my state because it's a lock. And that's true of a little bit more than 40 states. We know whether it's going blue or whether it's going red for president. But there are 7 states plus the Omaha area and Nebraska and maybe Texas where it's unclear. Those are the swing states.
mhm.
And when I look at what's at stake in this country, there's no question that we need Kamala Harris to defeat Donald Trump. I just think it's straightforward. It doesn't change the reality that the foreign policy of, if you will, the Biden Harris administration, it's been in terms of human rights abysmal. And the support for the war on people in Gaza has been and continues to be horrific, and now war on people in Lebanon as well. And as you're saying, Santita, this is no brief at all being carried for what Hamas did or what Hezbollah is doing. But the fact is, if you look at the deaths, the injuries, the maiming, there's just an overwhelming amount of the suffering is being inflicted by Israel. And one other big thing, which is sort of hidden in plain sight, the United States doesn't give a dime to Hamas, doesn't give a dime to Hezbollah. The US, courtesy of US taxpayers, hundreds of over the years and in the last few months, tens of billions of dollars in military aid to Israel as that government slaughters civilians, mostly children and women in Gaza. This is really hard for the mainstream media to face up to, and certainly Democrats in high places, with very few exceptions, just don't want to go there.
Well, I mean, of course, we're talking with Norman Solomon. You've got to get the book War Made Invisible, because I think it has to be invisible in order for us to take it.
Yeah.
If isn't that what I missed Vietnam? Uh, but it is my understanding, my reading of history, and I've heard you all talk about this, that when Walter Cronkite, if you will, and Eric Sevareid and people like that but Walter Cronkite particularly, because he's the icon still and the gold standard for television journalists, that when he put on a helmet and brought this war home and gave it a face, when it ceased to be invisible, when you saw these people, when you saw our children being carried off the fields of battle, just lifeless, that it changed everything. And it seems like that's what happened with Gaza, with TikTok, and this new democratized social media. When people saw it, everything changed. It seemingly overnight, the narrative in the Middle East. It changed and it was no longer invisible. But now you
There-
have people who, I'm sorry, please continue.
oh,
Because
no, no,
you,
it's a key point. There's a tremendous gap between the grassroots and people on Capitol Hill, where
Mhm.
very few members of Congress have been willing to say, stop the pipeline of weapons to Israel. And yet you look at the polling, YouGov and other, the top pollsters, all spring and summer to this month now into early fall, they're finding again and again that a strong majority of people in the United States want an end to weapons shipments to Israel as long as the war on Gaza continues. So that gap is just humongous. And if only we had democracy functioning, then Congress would not have been voting more and more to send more and more weapons. And I give this example in the afterward to war made invisible that a very, in some ways, courageous senator, Chris Van Hollen from Maryland, went to the border of Gaza in the spring and actually around February. And he saw that there were all these trucks. I mean, it's I'm going to use the word sin. People can think of all sorts of different ways to describe it. The sin of the, in huge proportions, the Israeli government blocking the trucks filled with food, where just miles away across the border into Gaza, young people, old people, civilians of all ages are malnourished, they're wasting away. Some of them are beginning to starve. And with US support, the Israeli government is refusing to let those trucks through, even though the rhetoric coming from the White House and the State Department is, oh, we want to take care of these civilians. So it's the gap between rhetoric and reality. There would have been a quick way to stop this crime against humanity. Biden could have said, as president, we're not sending you more weapons while you are using starvation as a weapon of war. But the starvation continued, the policy continued, and the kicker, as the saying goes, is that after this powerful speech on the Senate floor, when Van Hollen called Netanyahu a war criminal
He did.
for starving the people of Gaza as a weapon of war, hours later, Senator Van Hollen voted to send the Israeli government $14 billion more of weapons. So how do you explain that? It's really mind blowing.
Well, what is the toll that this military machine has? I mean, what is the toll? I mean, we know it's costing us money. Uh, and my goodness, the programs, when my mind just steam starts
Oh,
rising out of my head when I think of education and healthcare and all, I mean, housing and infrastructure, all the things that in the United States, we need this money. We need,
yeah,
but we don't have it. But what is the toll? First of all, what is the military machine and what
yeah.
is the toll that it's taking upon us?
Well, there's perennial so many layers. During the Vietnam War in 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. said that what was happening with the massive military spending was what, and these are his words, a destructive demonic suction tube was taking the resources out of the United States, spending it on war and destruction, where at home, as today in 2024, people were going hungry. They lacked health care, education, housing, neonatal care, elderly care. It's still true. And so it's a theft from humanity at home and abroad in that process. And right now, just the Pentagon budget is approaching 900 billion with a B dollars a year. That doesn't include the so-called intelligence uh, apparatus, tens of hundreds of millions more dollars. And so we're in a situation where the theft is institutionalized and it's a political struggle. And we're on the short end right now. We've been losing it. But we should, of course, never give up because anything we have to be proud of in this country is because people organized and they pushed against the odds and they won.
But when you look at Americans, I mean, do you think that we're do you think that we really understand the price that we're paying morally, economically?
For the most
Or,
part, no. It's hidden in plain sight. It's right in front of us. There's that famous phrase from President Kennedy, bear any burden, pay any price. But
Mhm.
the price is really not exposed. And I think a lot of this challenge is with the news media. Let's face it, there are cracks in the wall. This radio program is one of them. But the dominance of the wall is corporate owned, corporate operated, and corporate mentalities. And unfortunately, I include what's called public broadcasting for the most part, where the sponsorship is often corporate, the underwriting, the fealty, you might say, to the government, the fear of challenging US foreign policy in particular is so great that it limits the kind of reporting we get. So you look at the aggregate of whether it's CBS, NBC, CNN, or National Public Radio. Yes, there are some bright spots, but overall it reinforces the structures of illusion, really. And so I think activists, progressive activists, have always been challenged to say the illusions aren't going to cut it. There have to be ways to cut through it, to deal with what is affecting the lives of human beings. And I think of the great, I think it's Hans Christian Andersen's story of the the emperor's new clothes. Sometimes I think it's now it's the empire's new clothes. You know, where it takes the unschooled, unpropagandized child to say, oh, he's not wearing any clothes. You know, this finery, all this bragging about the beautiful clothing is just illusion. And, Noam Chomsky talks about the need to get rid of these convenient illusions that hide us from the nature of empire and also hide us from our own capacity as people who love each other, who we know, who care about those we don't know, to really bring about policy changes so we can be more fully proud of the country we live in.
but what about so where are we now? Because it seems like we're widening the wars. We're not. Every time Ukraine is presented with an opportunity for peace, America tamps that down. They say, don't, no, don't sign it. Look, we're going to continue. We're going, now you have long range missiles that we can fire into Russia. You can do
Yeah,
that. It's like we're on the verge of World War III.
yeah.
I mean, is that an exaggeration? Or do you think, because it seems like this is going, we've gone from Gaza and the West Bank into Lebanon. I can see Iraq. I can see Iran. I can see Syria. It just continues to grow.
Well, more and more, I think of what Dr. King called the madness of militarism as really a contagion in this country. This is a very militaristic country, and we're at a high point, or if you look at it another way, a low point
Mm.
of the militarism that is just so pervasive. It's in the media, it's on Capitol Hill, it's in the White House, and even the supposed diplomats like Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, they're there to perpetuate war. The rhetoric is just another matter. So it's a very lucrative thing. As you say, uh, Ukraine, which is getting a tremendous amount of billions of dollars worth of weapons, and more of that is on the way. Yes, they're defending themselves, but they're shooting missiles closer and closer to Moscow. You know, can we imagine if it were coming from Canada, missiles towards Washington? I mean, it's just seeing the world through others' eyes is just so crucial. And yet that's really truncated, circumscribed in our own lives. And one way to put it is, yes, we hear a lot about what the world looks like through the White House windows.
Hmm.
How much do we hear about how the world looks through the Kremlin windows?
Why is that important for Americans to do?
Really important because, as John Kennedy said in his famous American University speech 8 months after the Cuban Missile Crisis, if two nuclear superpowers get in a situation where one backs the other into a corner, where it's either defeat or use nuclear weapons, that could be, as he said in another speech, victory would be ashes in our mouth because we wouldn't be there anymore. I mean, this is what's at stake in a nuclear world. And so the lack of capacity, interest, willingness to imagine that there are other ways to see the world than from Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., USA, that failure is not only something that academics or even we might criticize, it could be fatal for humanity.
But what about I'm trying. What about Antony Blinken? Because he seems to be problematic. I mean, Secretary of State is okay, at least on paper. Well, actually, in fact, they are supposed to really promote peace, and he's been caught in a lot of untruths, well, outright lies. And yet they allow him to keep going and going. I mean, and they don't allow. I mean, this is our policy. And what about? But he's doing this, and he appears to be a problematic figure, Norman Solomon.
I think highly problematic. And we can trace that when the Trump administration was in, Blinken, being aligned with Democrats, was with a consulting firm, West Exec Advisors. They were basically well paid, white collar weapons merchants.
Mhm.
And he and others were profiting from the sales of weapons when he wasn't in the administration. He has been working very closely with Joe Biden for at least 25 years. Antony Blinken was the chief of staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 2002 when Joe Biden chaired that committee and held really bogus hearings in the summer of 2002 about whether the US should invade Iraq. And Biden, with help from Antony Blinken, like all of us younger then, made sure that there wasn't testimony from people who were raising questions. I mean, how do you know that there are weapons of mass destruction? Questions like that were off the table. So this is a team that's been around for a long time. And the net result is that they feel, and there's a lot of accounts to this effect, they feel that they know how the world should be dealt with by the USA. I mean, really, there are accounts of Biden, and it's not a personal thing. It's not about them as
Mhm.
individual personalities that concerns us. It's about policy and the ramifications. Biden, often when he's briefed by people, it's as though he has his fingers in his ears. He knows what he should do before he gets briefed by the experts. And this has, of course, been horrific because as they go into in the afterword to War Made Invisible, it has been a tragic farce the last 50 weeks now of
Yeah.
the Biden administration pretending that they want an end to the carnage while they make it possible by sending the weapons. And there's one way to stop all this bloodshed, which is to stop providing the weapons to inflict it.
But don't you think we have to dispel the myth? And I see Ariel Gold, our mutual friend, my sister beloved, in waiting to speak with you. I'm going to bring her up shortly. But understanding the military machine, as you put it, because really, that's what Dr. King talked about. You continue to reference him, and that's what Reverend Jackson ran his presidential campaigns on. Wait a minute, the military machine. It's out of control. Defending ourselves, but creating offense is not what we need to do. And we do that all the time. Help me to understand, because it seems that our Secretary of State is part of the military machine. Boeing and Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, they're part of the military. I mean, the military machine, and that's where the money is going. I, I think it's important for people to understand that when these checks are written, people think, I guess, $20 billion is going to the people of Israel, and it's like, no, that's not what's happening. It's kind of being cycled back here and into all of these countries.
Absolutely. It's striking that these are often technically called armed sales that the U.S. is selling to Israel. But where did Israel get the money? They got it from the U.S. Treasury, and then they buy the weapons. And so it cycles right back. Extremely lucrative, to put it mildly. At an individual level, so many members of Congress, when they retire, they are on the boards of or they lobby for major military contractors, often the staffers at high levels of these contractors then go to places like the House Armed Services Committee staff. We've had the Secretary of Defense now, Mr. Austin, used to be on the board of Raytheon,
Yeah.
one of the major military contractors. This should be unconscionable, but it's so routine that it's like it's not news. You know, it's for unfortunately for major media outlets, including and sometimes especially those most highly esteemed, the New York Times, the Washington Post. For them, what we're talking about is like a dog bites person story. You know, what's new about that? It's not newsworthy to them because it's been this way for so long.
But the Washington Post did a series on the revolving door between the upper reaches of the military and Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing that cannot keep a plane afloat. And my goodness, I pray for the astronauts in space who are going to be there a year just about before they can get them home. We pray. And they continue to get rewarded. I don't understand. I mean, we haven't won a war since the Second World War. And we're
Well,
continuing.
there's a lot of critiques that are done on Capitol Hill, for that matter, as well as through the news media, and they're largely tactical critiques. As a matter of fact, when the United States loses a war, and this goes back all the way back even to Walter Cronkite in his famous speech where he said that it was a quagmire. He came back from Vietnam. I think this would have been early 1968. And he said, you know, very ponderous voice, and it appears now that this war cannot be won and will end as a stalemate. What we can do as a thought experiment, what if the United States had been willing to triumph or able to triumph, capable of, and then proved able to crush people in Vietnam within a couple few years? And there wasn't so much nearly so much casualties and death among Americans, it would have been the way that still today the media retrospectives and the coverage in real time was viewed as the Gulf War in 1991, where notoriously from the air the U.S. military engaged in what was awfully called a turkey shoot of retreating Iraqi soldiers. And within 6 weeks, an estimated 100,000 Iraqis were killed. Well, it was quick. The quick wars, uh, not a big problem in the US media and mass politics. And so it was like, hey, we did a good job. It's only when wars go on year after year after year and the US doesn't win that something kicks in. It's like this was not a good investment. So yeah, better late than never to call the war to a halt for whatever reasons. But there's such an underlying polluted aquifer, you might say, of
Mm.
militarism that we still have to challenge, and we have to get deeper on this because the short term, as we're talking about electorally, it's not good. You know, Trump is a totally unreliable. He's a broken clock. He might be correct once in a while about foreign policy, but the fact is, he would be even worse for Palestinian people than Biden or Harris. Trump has said that Netanyahu should, quote, finish the job. The 4 years of the Trump administration was horrific for Palestinian people, way worse than under Obama or even the last 3.5 years generally, except for what's happened in Gaza. So I think we need to recognize the task ahead and be realistic about it.
Well, because I'm wondering, because I think of Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who felt that 500,000 children dead, it was worth the price.
Yeah, it sort of shocked me. You know, I think we should still be shocked as much as we may feel we've seen so much that is disturbing. The day we wake up and we see the news and we aren't upset, it's sort of like a bumper sticker. You know, if you aren't upset, you're not paying attention. You know,
Mm.
so I think we should be upset. We should be shocked. We shouldn't be jaded. I was shocked when I did the research in for War Made Invisible that when Madeleine Albright made that statement to Leslie Stahl on CBS program 60 Minutes, where she was asked by Leslie Stahl, what about the reports that 500,000 Iraqi children have died because of the US sanctions on Iraq? The response from Madeleine Albright, then the national security advisor to the president, was, well, we think it's worth it. And a number of months later, she was nominated to be Secretary of State. And she won unanimous vote and approval in the Senate, 99-0. So I'm thinking, here's somebody who just said it was worth it for the deaths of 500,000 children to be caused by the US government, and then she gets promoted. There's something really, really wrong that we have to keep addressing.
Well, when war is invisible, I guess it is okay because
Yeah.
we see 500,000 children. Let me bring up Ariel Gold because, of course, she's from the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And one of the things that I have learned, Justin, we're all from these wonderful traditions, um, religious traditions, whether they're cultural for us or religious. They really guide us. They've shaped us.
Right.
And that's why it's always wonderful to hear from Ariel Gold, because what I love about the Fellowship of Reconciliation is that they bring all these faith traditions together. And it just kind of puts us on the same page. And I'm so grateful that my father's ministry was that broad, has been that broad and continues to be. I mean, Ariel Gold, this book is magnificent. And I urge everyone, well, I'm a bibliophile, everybody. I have the hardcover. And yes, when the paperback came out, I bought it. Why did I buy it? Because I knew there would be an addendum. And there has been. Because so much has changed since the first iteration, the first edition of the book came out. I mean, now we're a year into, 2 weeks shy of, it's not a war in Gaza, it's a genocide in Gaza. A war is between armies. That's not what we have here. We don't. And Ariel Gold, your thoughts as you speak to this tremendous icon that we have with us today?
It's great to be on with you, Santita and Norman. As I was listening to you talk, Norman, I was thinking we need to, and I'm going to get really idealistic here, but we need to start envisioning how we can create a world that is post-war. Now that we've gotten to this point where, Putin just announced that he'll lessen the threshold for use of nuclear weapons, and we're watching, this escalate in the Middle East. And we've been saying this since World War One, right? Since World War One, which is when the Fellowship of Reconciliation formed. We called that the war to end all wars. And it has, since then, it has become more and more, omnicide for the entire world. And, moving into this idea of post-war, and this is really where Fellowship of Reconciliation is based, we have to give up the idea of just wars, give up the idea of that violence can ever, that the ends can justify the means in that way. And we have to recognize the trap that is, whether it's the massacre carried out by Hamas on October 7th, which is defended by, various parts of the left, or whether it's, thinking that we can ever solve this through any of those means. Fellowship of Reconciliation notoriously, I've been asked, because we identify we're a pacifist organization, and I've been asked by folks like, really, how pacifist is Fellowship of Reconciliation? And my answer to them is that we opposed U.S. entry into World War II. And that is the depths of our belief that we have to create a better world, and we have to stop thinking that there is a resolution through bombs and guns and walls. And right now, as much as ever, but certainly not any less than when we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We have to put an end to this madness. And yes, these are the merchants of death. Those are the only winners of these wars, are Lockheed Martin and Boeing and the Russian weapons companies as well, that are, of course, major players in this as well.
I mean, all of them. I mean, because Ariel, it's a human toll. I mean, the fact that it is so hard to find a book that talks about how war is made invisible and the human toll of a military machine. Because we're not looking at the human toll. I've had Matthew Ho on the show many, many times. He talks about moral injury. So many of our soldiers come back morally injured. Julia Ward Howe, when she created Mother's Day for Peace in 1870, after the Civil War, were mothers who were in the North and the South were encouraged and did treat all of the soldiers. They said, I hope that if my child is caught behind enemy lines, some mother will have mercy on my child. When are we going? Norman Solomon, we've got to get there. I mean, because I haven't found a book really in recent memory. I read a lot. I don't read everything, but that talks about the human toll. The human toll. I mean, why did you want to talk about the human toll? I mean, because Ariel, no one's talking about how we're injured morally by this.
Yeah.
This is costing us.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at the news media, people are almost rendered irrelevant to the discourse.
Ariel, you were saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're coming up on the Jewish high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and it's when we as Jews lean into teshuvah, repair, and repentance. And one of the last readings for Shabbat, the last Shabbat before the New Year, which will be tomorrow evening, God says to us, I've given you the options of life and death. You must choose life. Mm-hmm. And there's a reading before that, which, is about how we are all pieces of the collective and without each other. And, so we're also going into, during the high holidays this year will be the anniversary of October 7th. So what a heavy 10-day period. And I'm already seeing the manufacturing of consent. And that phrase has been in my mind that we spoke about during the Iraq War. Since then, as I'm watching, this idea that October 7th should be a call to beat the drumbeats for revenge, where October 7th should be the anniversary of October 7th of a horrific massacre. Yes, the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Must be a call for ceasefire. It must be a call to end this madness, and that includes, as you were saying, Santita, the destruction of Jewish of young Israelis, right, who are sent into Gaza, who naturally, feel that war in itself is, there's a lot, all the Jewish talk about there was sexual violence on October 7th. Well, of course there was sexual violence on October 7th. That's part and parcel with war. It wasn't unique to October 7th. It isn't unique in the Israeli prisons being done to Palestinian prisoners. This is part and parcel of war, and those committing it, as Dr. King said as well, are victims as well. And we need to be able to start thinking of the collective, all of us, that we may choose life.
Well, I want to give these last 2 or 3 minutes to you, Norman Solomon, because I want to thank you for this tremendous book, War Made Invisible, How Americans Hide the Human Toll of the Military Machine. It's hiding in plain sight. You keep saying that, Norman Solomon. It's right before our very eyes. And yet, I think maybe it's just too hard for us to see.
It's scary to come to terms with living in a country where the government is lying about the roots of the war and also perpetuating the war and supporting genocide. That's where we are in the end of September 2024. And when I was working on this afterward for the paperback about what's happened in Gaza, I thought about the subtitle, How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. And I realized that the Israel Defense Forces are an adjunct to the US military. They're part of the US military machine. And we need to acknowledge that and change it. They have a different command structure, but the same overall regional goals. One other thought. I mean, I'm very far from a biblical scholar in any way, but there's a Leonard Cohen song called "Song of Isaac," and he talks about how in the Bible it says that Isaac is told to kill his son, and the song says, "Those who build these altars now to sacrifice these children, you must not do it anymore."
That's absolutely true. I mean, my grandmother, God rest her soul, my grandmother Helen, my father's mother would say, she'd shake her head as she would watch people misbehave. She said, if they knew better, they'd do better.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that if war were made visible, we would do this differently?
I think it would help. It would be necessary but insufficient because, as Susan Sontag says in her book regarding the pain of others, the context put around it can encourage people to think the war is terrible, we must end it by winning. And so we need a narrative to combine with the photography and the imagery.
Norman Solomon, everybody, War Made Invisible. It's not invisible. People are being killed every single day. And you know what? If they're being killed, Norman Solomon, I think we are too.
Yes.
I think a little bit of us dies every day that that we see injustice and we don't try to stop it. You've been reaching toward Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Rabbi Heschel all interview long. And I think of them and I think of Gandhi. I think of all of these people who came to us to tell us to study war no more. And I thank you for putting this book in that tradition, because that's what you've done for me. Biblical scholar, you better go on to be a rabbi. I got a weakness for preachers.
Thank you so much for everything.
Oh, no, thank you for all that you've done and all that you continue to do. I mean, you're a man on a mission, and I love and appreciate that. War Made Invisible, everybody. You need to get it, and you need to sit down with your loved ones, with your children, and talk about it. That's probably why my brothers, my sister, and I have this passion, because our parents would talk to us about this. My parents wouldn't let my brothers get GI Joes and things like that. They said, "No, we're going to do this differently." And I think that we can do that. But war has been made invisible, everybody. And Americans we're hiding this human toll of the military machine and everybody. When we know better, I think we're going to do better. But it's going to take some work. Norman Solomon, thank you for all of the work that you do. Roots Action, everybody, give them your support. Because I think there are a bunch of prophets over there. You foresaw 2024, and oh my gosh, look at where we are. And we'll just see where we will be as we go into the high Jewish holiday. May God bless you in this high holy season for you and for all of us. And God bless us as we move toward November 6th and beyond. Thank you so much. Thank you for all you do. Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless you, everybody. Have a great, 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 great evening and have a wonderful weekend. Much love and many blessings to you. I'm Santita Jackson. I'll see you on Keep Up Alive this weekend. God bless.